This is the historic amphitheater at Igira in Greece. Imagine the scene. 320 years before the birth of Christ. Every seat on these terraces will be filled. There's a buzz of anticipation in the theater as the audience waits for the play to begin. And somewhere, very likely, there'll be several elderly men who've lived through an experience which would make any play dull by comparison. They're the veterans of the army of Alexander the Great, who've returned home from the ends of the world, having played their part in one of the greatest adventure stories in history. They'll probably be in some special seats because they're treated as heroes, having known the man who was worshipped by many as a god, Alexander of Macedon. Philip chose Leonidas, an uncle of the Queen. He could be trusted and knew what to do and how to do it.
Alexander, how delightful of you to honor me when I was feeling so alone. So, do you hate us for what you're made to endure? It is not my choice. I would have joyousness in your days, you know that. Do not blame me. It is Philip's command. He insists that it will make you strong. He seems not to realize that you are already strong.
I prepared him well.
For what? Alexander was a loving, gentle child until you took him from me.
We don't expect you to understand that.
Understand what? That you tried to turn a child against the woman who bore him?
Take him away. You'll kill anyone who tries to ride him.
My father is losing a great force because he doesn't know how to handle him.
All right, my young friend. Let's see you up there. If you can ride him, I'll buy him for you.
The young fool's got on him. Fetch him back.
When you lead him, keep his head towards the sun. He is afraid of his own shadow.
I do believe, Prince Alexander, that Macedonia may be too small for you.
As a term of affection, Alexander called his horse Bucephalus, which means ox head, and he rode him into battle until the heroic animal was 28 years old. Spartan training and methods had produced a very remarkable young man who was well equipped to look after himself, but his education was by no means complete. And Philip, that tough and redoubtable campaigner, made what was for him a very interesting decision.
What, I wondered, would a Prince of Macedon, being raised to war, want to know about the life cycle of the Aegean horsefly, or the fact that hedgehogs fornicate while standing up?
You knew what I was after.
I quickly perceived your purpose to marry knowledge to the power of your lance and thus make it even stronger.
I wanted my son to get the best education he could get.
Wonder what you would have done.
High time he was taken away from his mother. She fills his head with woman's nonsense. He must learn to live in a man's world, with the gods of men, not the gods of their pampered female. The god of war, not the god of wine. I want a civilized boy. And I want a tough one.
Philip chose Leonidas, an uncle of the Queen. He could be trusted and knew what to do and how to do it. Exercise physical discomfort. That was Alexander's life from now on.
Stop!
As time passed, the Cold War between Macedonia and Athens erupted into occasional bloodshed. Athenians ambushed Philip's couriers and captured his secret dispatches. By these standards of the time, these skirmishes were not that important, until word reached the Macedonian court that Athens had sent ambassadors to the king of Persia, persuading him to attack Philip. Now, along with all the other developments that Philip saw taking place, this was the last straw. So he prepared his troops for outright war against Athens and against Thebes, their new allies.
We, the Athenians, with speed, that's what wins a battle. Cavalry, with the shape and the speed and arrowhead.
Like a lightning bolt. Straight to the heart of the enemy.
That's more than just the cavalry. Shield bearers standing firm as a wall of rock. Keep the pressure to the center and press hard. Hammer blows to the flanks for the cavalry. Lances with blades as sharp as Aristotle's scalpels to cut through the enemy lines. Perfect drill, perfect wheeling, and speed, my son. Discipline and speed.
Now for Athens. The Athenians must be trembling within their walls.
Well, if they fear me enough, maybe no need to fight them.
Oh, they must fear you now.
All right, that's so. They may listen to me. If not to me, then to you. You've learned the handling of such men. You know better how to talk to them. You've learned their politics and their ways. You be my ambassador to them. Ride on ahead and tell them that Philip of Macedon and you, Alexander, who defeated the sacred band of their Theban allies, will not destroy their beautiful city, provided they deliver their fleet of ships into my hands.
What do you want their fleet for?
For the future. When the time comes and we're even stronger, we can use them for our attack against the Persian barbarians. Now go, ride!
Only the fleet, understand? And not a single stone of Athens will be harmed. Go! Only the fleet!
This was a very important moment in Philip's career because it was there that the newly formed League of Greek City-States had gathered. And after his recent military triumph at Chaeronea, they elected him as supreme commander of all Greek armies. Now, this was a substantial step ahead. There was the personal glory, of course, but Macedonia and Athens erupted into occasional bloodshed. Athenians ambushed Philip's couriers and captured his secret dispatches. At the heart of that strategy was a unified Greece, and Philip was ready to go to war to achieve it.
We march south. First Greece, then Persia. And of Greece, first Athens, and of Athens, first Demosthenes.
Hundreds of miles to the south, Demosthenes, the politician and orator, was waging his war of words in the marketplace mainland of Asia. Soon his ships would be sent home, leaving Alexander and his army to face a formidable task. In 336 BC, the Persian Empire was enormous. It was enormously powerful, and it could place, without any trouble, 250,000 men under arms to defend itself. So no wonder Darius, the king of Persia, felt safe and secure.
Tell me, Bagos, what has been whispered in the tents of these satraps?
The landing of the Macedonian Alexander at Troy is on their lips, my lord.
I knew he was coming. I allowed him to enter.
He marches.
I know. And the further, the better. I will allow that too. And when he's come far enough, his army will be exhausted, and his supplies dwindling. Then my Persian army will slay them and slit open their empty Greek stomachs. We are ready.
From Troy, Alexander rejoined his forces, which by now had also crossed the Hellespont. Darius's generals were making preparations to deal with the young invader. They had chosen the battlefield, the river Granicus. There are conflicting accounts as to what happened, but of the result there can be no doubt. River Granicus, Persians on this side, Greeks on this side. Alexander had advanced in battle formation with his infantry in two groups here and there. Both the wings were protected by cavalry, and the heavy transport and baggage and camp followers and the rest were back there. The Persians faced them from the banks of this steep river. They were commanded by an odd assortment of men. There was Memnon, the mercenary general, who was tough and experienced in battle, but most of the others were provincial governors and relatives of Darius the king, and could well have been appointed more by virtue of their social status than for their military skills, but they had a superb defensive position. Steep banks of the fast-flowing and very deep Granicus. For Alexander had all the signs of being an extremely difficult and very tough fight.
The disadvantages are getting across and gaining those steep, slippery banks on the other side. But once there, the advantages will be ours. Our men are superior fighters, and our long spears are much better weapons than the light lances of the Persians. Each man knows his duty, and will be prepared to die in order to ensure the victory. Our advance will lead through the center. Parmenion will command the left, and I will command the cavalry on the right.
The
Persians have offered a prize to any man who can kill you.
If you must fear Ptolemy, don't fear for me.
When the trumpets finally sounded that day, and we dedicated ourselves to the god of battle. The roar that went up was enough to...
They passed through the streets of Sardis like liberators. Pursuit of the defeated enemy was the maxim, a tactic that spread fear before him like a flood clearing a passage. After Sardis, cities fell one after another like dominoes. About 60 miles south of Sardis, they came to the walls of Ephesus, and once more Alexander prepared to fight. But the Greeks within the city opened the gates for him, and they entered without a struggle. It was here that Alexander began to show himself as something more than a military commander. The loyal Greeks in Ephesus saw their opportunity to revenge themselves on the Greek citizens who had supported the Persian regime. And these collaborators were hounded, pursued, dragged out of their beds, and murdered. Alexander put a stop to that. There'd be no more bloodshed, he ordered, and for good measure, no more taxes, no more tributes. He established a democratic government to replace the Persian dictatorship. It was a diplomatic triumph to set beside his military conquests. Another 50 miles south, and they came to the city of Miletus. Alexander attacked, breached the walls, entered. There was no massacre. Looting was forbidden. Instead, he pardoned the citizens. He even pardoned the Greek mercenaries who defended the city against him. He'd never done that before. It was very good public relations. The legend of the beneficent conqueror was beginning to spread. For some, Alexander was a godlike hero. For others, he was an object of terror. But now he was able to reveal himself as a strategist of remarkable vision. So long as Darius had a strong fleet, Alexander and Greece were vulnerable. Now, other generals would have taken to the sea to battle for supremacy, but Alexander sent his ships home. So he now chose to use his army to overrun all the Persian ports, to deprive the Persian fleet of its bases, and so render it impotent.
An oracle has foretold that whoever loosens the knot becomes Lord of Asia.
If I'm to be ruler of all Asia, I must loose the Gordian knot.
It's the legend.
Does the legend tell of any constriction?
Not that I know of.
Then what matter how I loose it?
Forward, they had an extraordinary stroke of good luck. Well, lucky for them. Memnon died suddenly, and without him in command, the Persian blockade of Greece was doomed to failure, and Alexander could use some good luck. The long winter had taken its toll, and even he was close to exhaustion and became desperately ill. For some weeks, the Greeks had been trying to locate Darius and his army. Unknown to them, the Persians were doing the same thing, looking for the Greeks. They covered thousands of miles searching for each other, and at last they made contact. It was going to be a very important battle, and careful preparations were made on both sides. Alexander addressed his battle commanders.
You are no strangers to danger. You have faced death many times before. The battle today will be against an enemy you have beaten before. They are Medes and Persians, men who for centuries have lived like children. But we have trained ourselves in hardship and danger and war, and they are no match for us. But most important, we are free men, and they are their masters' slaves. Who among you, this day of days, would trust your life to a slave? To be sure, you will meet Greeks, Greek mercenary traitors amongst the Persian ranks, lepers who sell their lives for pay. But we fight for Greece. We struggle with love for our country in our hearts. We bow to no man. The victory today will be against Darius himself. The Persians have Darius. But you have Alexander!
On or about the 1st of November in the year 333 BC, the two armies came face to face with each other at a place called Issus on the easternmost end of the Mediterranean. Alexander was vastly outnumbered by the Persians in a place which was geographically rather like this. On one side was the sea, on the other the curving foothills and the mountains beyond, and directly in front of Alexander, coming across, going down into the sea, was a river. Beyond that, Darius and his army.
The Persian king was in too much of a hurry. He left these behind.
He sent messages to Alexander's headquarters offering to make a deal for their return.
Yes, it's all very well for Darius to send envoys offering friendship in return for the release of his wife and family. But can he be trusted?
Scribe, here is my reply to the defeated Darius. Your ancestors invaded Greece and caused destruction in the land. We had done nothing to warrant it. And now I, the supreme commander of all Greece, have come to Asia to punish the Persians for this crime. Your spies have over and again tried to destroy the peace of the Greek city-states and to disunite a nation. It was then that I made war on you. And only then. I destroyed your generals and satraps in battle at Granicus. I defeated you and your entire army at Issus. And now, by the will of the gods, I am master of all that was once yours. You may request me for the return of your wife and family. I will listen to your requests. But you must attend upon me yourself, as you would attend upon the Lord of the continent of Asia. Do not send emissaries. From henceforth, do not address me as an equal. Everything you own is now mine. All your possessions are now mine. Tell me what you want, remembering who I am and the proper form of address and behavior, or I shall treat you like a common criminal. Should you decide to fight me for your throne, stand and fight. Do not hide. For be certain, wherever you run, I shall find you.
They called it.
It was a surprise to many. Alexander caring for the body of Darius. A week later, he sent the body back for a royal funeral. And then he made Darius his brother, a Macedonian companion.
Alexander accorded Darius honors he had never earned, and buried him as the hero he never was.
You would accuse Alexander for an act of compassion?
I think it was an act of statesmanship. I've no doubt that Alexander was a shrewd man. Indeed, what I learned from him came to be of great use to me when I became Pharaoh of Egypt.
Then you should thank him, Pharaoh. For although many may lead, few have the grace to rule wisely.
I wondered how he would reconcile such an extended reign with the thing that really mattered to him. Finding the great sea on the edge of the world to the east.
Catching up with Bessus at the same time.
Perhaps the fact that his own father had been assassinated had something to do with it. There was no giving up. He tracked Bessus relentlessly for hundreds of miles. Eventually, they reached the mountains of the Hindu Kush, which were said to be close to the edge of the world.
Bessus, the assassin. I am Alexander of Macedon, ruler of all Asia. First you shall be scourged. Then you shall be punished by your own people. Your nose and ears cut off, as is their custom. Then
he carefully avoided involving the Greeks in the execution of Bessus. It was an astute move. The Persians themselves could have that satisfaction, and they'd probably thank him for it.
this is the sentence passed on you for the murder.
The function of a court eunuch was well understood by the Greeks. Someone like Bagoas could be loyal and very useful. In time, he might even become an influential figure in Alexander's Persian court. Some eunuchs had well-deserved reputations for ruthlessness. Sometimes the very survival of their masters could be in their hands.
It was too difficult for some to accept the Persian ways.
I can understand that. No Greek wishes to bow to any man, whether the man be a simple master or a king.
Yes, I've met few who'll be robbed of their pride, and rightly so.
But surely ignorance can be the only excuse for those who refuse to bow to Alexander. For what Greek would consider himself robbed of his pride by honoring the son of a god?
But he had to be obeyed. And in order to be obeyed by the Persians, he had to exact from them the reverence they had given to Darius.
But he did not have to exact anything of the like from us.
Yes, but the Persians knew he claimed to be a god.
There are not enough Greeks to rule the Persians unless the Persians cooperate. And they will only do that if they're allowed to share the government.
Then you must encourage the Persians to behave like Greeks.
Only the monarch understands the role of the throne. Of course, there are those who know better. They sit on the sidelines, sniping, criticizing, usually in secret.
Fast going the same way.
Visitors to Alexander's quarters discovered that he was indeed trying to rule the Persians by encouraging the idea that they should regard him as one of them. Some of the older Greek veterans were disgusted by this change of style. For them, all Persians were barbarians and would remain so.
Persian Catamite should have his tongue cut out.
Persian Catamite? These are unwise words for a Greek soldier. You are drunk, Clytus.
Drunk? This Greek drunk saved Alexander's life. Can the king remember Granicus?
We find you insulting, Clytus.
Oh, we, is it now? You know, Alexander, I rather envy my friends who fell in battle. You know why, Alexander? Because they did not live to see you dressed like a Persian harlot, surrounded by cringing, slimy eunuchs.
Enough, Clytus.
Euripides must have had you in mind, Alexander. He said it all. When the public spends its hard-earned cash on setting up a monument of war, in hugest capitals you'll find the name of some effeminate field marshal who fanned himself while others plied their spears.
It is said that when he heard Anaxarchus's words, Alexander sat up, having evidently come to terms with his intense sense of guilt. And his troops supported him by declaring their own verdict, that for his treason, Clytus's death was no more than just.
When my son was 20, he was king. When he was 25, he had wiped out the Persian barbarians and set about the business of ruling them. Of course, he was a brilliant administrator. Conquer and pillage, Philip, that was you. Conquer?
There was gold in the walls of the palaces, but we couldn't remove it.
Alexander had been away. When he came back, the gold and silver was being loaded for transport. It was legitimate wealth for Greece and for other purposes. Not for Alexander himself, whose share was no greater than any other officer's.
You evade the issue. Beautiful Persepolis. Burnt.
Take care, Demosthenes. We know your cause. You smear, you belittle, you weave tissues of lies purely for your own political ends.
There was a party, of course, to celebrate departure on the morrow, was there not? There was good food like this, riotous company, and the wine flowed all evening. There was music and dances. But that wasn't enough for Alexander, was it? With more wine in his veins than blood, he set fire to the 100-columned hall of Xerxes, and you all ran amok and joined in. Doesn't the sweet smell of burning cedar wood fill your nostrils still?
It was justified revenge on the Persians for what they did to the temples of Athens.
At the time, it was my belief he had planned it all along. So much care had been taken to strip the treasures and remove them out of harm's way. After all, he didn't want to leave all those magnificent palaces for a Persian governor to live in, did he?
You too have your case.
As with so many other aspects of Alexander's story, historians are still arguing about the motives for the destruction of Persepolis. Was it an accident? Or a political gesture because he felt that Persepolis could be too dangerous to leave as a symbol of the old regime? Or a moment of revenge? Nobody knows. But it does have significance in another way. It marks a point in Alexander's life at which his talents as a military genius become less important. Unless he was to hand over to somebody else, he had to start behaving like a king to become the effective ruler of the Asia which he'd so decisively conquered. In fact, to be king of Persia. The Great Crusade was ended. Greece had been avenged. So at this moment, he released his allies from the Greek city-states, paid them off. But for himself, he was determined not to give up the pursuit of Darius. From now on, Alexander's troops were in it for the adventure and for share of any booty that might be going. Achilles would never have allowed a Persian enemy to escape, and neither would Alexander.
Which I will command, and we will go by this route here. Craterus will command...
He had a profound and almost mystical belief in himself and his destiny, and it communicated itself to the men around him. He knew they would follow him in the chase for Darius.
Persian. He called himself the king, because, as he was fond of saying, there was only one. True indeed, but not of him. Alexander was the king.
After 2 days of hard riding across the corner of the desert, Alexander finally caught up with the Persian king. For the adventure and for share of any booty that might be going. And perhaps Alexander had another reason for continuing with the hunt. His mother had told him often enough that he was related through her to Achilles. He had always tried to compete with the Greek heroes' achievements. Achilles would never have allowed a Persian enemy to escape, and neither would Alexander.
Which I will command, and we will go by this route here. Craterus will command...
He had a profound and almost mystical belief in himself and his destiny, and it communicated itself to the men around him. He knew they would follow him in the chase for Darius.
He will find me.
The fleet had survived. Nearchus and 4 officers struggled for weeks overland to try to locate Alexander and his army. It's said that when he finally caught up, Nearchus was in such a bad state himself that he was unrecognizable. Alexander wept unashamedly for joy at the return of his old friend and announced that he was worth more to him than the continent of Asia itself. And that was saying something, because by now Alexander had convinced himself that he was the ruler of the whole of Asia. The nagging problem still remained. Were Alexander and his Greek army in Persia to rule as conquerors, or were they going to merge with the Persians and become a single nation at peace? He never made any secret that he wanted to merge. The army was still openly opposed to the whole idea. But Alexander was determined to get his own way. In the end, the veterans' resentment exploded into open hostility. It was mutiny.
Arrest those men! And him! And him!
You no longer trust me. You speak treason openly to my face. You no longer love me. The wealth of the world flows now into your hands. You have become captains, generals. You have become my governors of provinces. I have done this for you, and I keep nothing for myself.
I have paid your debts, even though you have earned countless war booty. And those who have died in battle, they are honored. Their parents are honored. And all you want is to desert me. Well, go then. Leave me to the mercy of barbarian men. Out of my sight. Huh? As soon as I am within, seal this tent and let none enter until further orders.
Once again, like Achilles at Troy, he will retire to his tent and remain there for days.
Yes, but last time in India. Look at them, like whipped children at their supper.
This time, it is they who will sue for pardon.
Ptolemy wasn't wrong. The veterans had second thoughts, and they begged for Alexander's forgiveness.
We are at one, then. Be warned.
Well, the mutiny was dealt with. Alexander gave a banquet as a gesture of reconciliation. 9,000 men attended. The Greeks sat in an inner ring, circled by Persians in an outer ring, and they all prayed for unity and concord. It was a considerable achievement getting these Greek and Persian soldiers together in this way, and Alexander had good reason to be satisfied, and to mark the occasion, 10,000 older and wounded Greek soldiers were sent home with full pay plus 1 silver talent, which today is the equivalent of 60,000 American dollars. Alexander's old friend Craterus was put in charge, and his instructions were to lead the veterans back to Macedonia. In his capacity as hegemon, supreme commander of the Pan-Hellenic Union, Alexander sent a proclamation to Greece, which was read out before 20,000 people at the Olympic Games. Having achieved, against the odds, a considerable measure of harmony in Persia, he urged the Greek city-states to allow all those who had been exiled for political reasons to return to their homes and their property. Games and celebrations were held at the stadium in Ecbatana. Alexander knew how to throw a party. Day after day, the countryside around echoed with the festivities.
After all, which of us had not suffered fever before? Ephysium was a tough companion.
We decree that the manes and tails of all the horses in the cavalry be shaven. That in our royal palace there be no singing of songs, nor playing of musical instruments for 1 year. That the regiment of horse that Hephaestion commanded.
6 weeks after the funeral, Alexander led a small force against a tribe of nomads that was causing trouble in the hills. It was hardly a difficult job for the man who had conquered the known world. His private thoughts were elsewhere. He was making plans to invade Arabia. About that time, an old seer at the palace reported finding bad omens for the future in the lobes of a sheep's liver.
Now, after our libation to the gods, a toast to the conquest of Arabia.